public focus remains locked on the kinetic. The deployment of carrier strike groups, thousands of troops, and advanced jet fighters is presented as a deterrent. This is a fatal miscalculation. Analysts fixate on missile salvos and conventional strike scenarios. This is the wrong threat vector. The adversary's objective is not to sink a carrier. That invites a symmetric response they cannot win. The strategic objective is to neutralize it, to render 100,000 tons of sovereign territory and its multi-billion-dollar air wing deaf, dumb, and blind. The real attack is not kinetic, it is silent. RUSI threat assessments confirm the primary asymmetric vector is not the warhead, but the wire. A targeted severing of key undersea fiber optic cables, coupled with non-kinetic satellite blinding, achieves strategic paralysis without triggering a launch-on-warning protocol. It isolates the asset. The result is the blind Leviathan, a formidable military machine, adrift and disconnected from the global financial system it was deployed to protect. It cannot receive targeting data. It cannot communicate with CENTCOM. It cannot protect dollar-denominated oil sales. It transforms from a strategic asset into a systemic liability, floating uselessly as the true attack begins elsewhere. The motive for this massive military deployment is not regional security. It is a function of a domestic solvency crisis. A long, conventional war is no longer politically or economically viable for the United States. The kinetic cost is simply too high. CSIS analysis of Russia's campaign demonstrates this with mathematical certainty. Protracted conflicts become an unbearable domestic liability, draining national treasure and political will until the state itself is threatened. This strategic weakness forces a pivot. Unable to afford a symmetric war of attrition, U.S. doctrine now defaults to provocation. The deployment of carriers and fighter jets, as confirmed by open-source intelligence, is not a deterrent. It is a deliberate application of overwhelming force designed to corner a weaker adversary. For an adversary like Iran, facing a launch-on-warning scenario against a superior kinetic force, conventional resistance is suicide. Their only logical vector for survival and retaliation is asymmetric. They cannot destroy a carrier group, but they can attack its reason for being. The true U.S. center of gravity is not its military hardware. It is the fragile confidence underpinning the global dollar system. By creating a crisis that removes Iran's incentive to operate within established rules, the U.S. is baiting a counterattack not on its fleet, but on the financial architecture that fleet is ultimately deployed to protect. This isn't a prelude to war. It is the controlled demolition of a debt structure using a regional conflict as the detonator. The core of the strategic miscalculation is economic. The Pentagon's entire force structure is built on a kinetic cost equation that is now inverted. According to analysis from RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute, the numbers are irrefutable. It costs roughly $5 million for a modern main battle tank. The first-person view drone that can achieve a mission kill against that same asset costs $500. This is a 10,000 to 1 cost disparity. It is not a battlefield problem. It is a solvency crisis for the Western warfighting model. This phenomenon has a name: the democratization of violence. The barrier to entry for inflicting catastrophic kinetic damage has collapsed. What once required a nation-state's industrial base, factories, advanced research, and immense capital now requires a credit card and an internet connection. An adversary like Iran no longer needs to compete symmetrically. They can leverage this arbitrage, fielding thousands of intelligent, low-cost threats that are designed to overwhelm multi-million-dollar defense systems. Each interceptor fired at a cheap drone is a net economic loss for the defender, bleeding the system dry without a single symmetric engagement. Therefore, the U.S. carrier group deployed to the Middle East, as reported, is not a deterrent. It is a multi-billion-dollar collection of high-value targets. An adversary's optimal strategy is not to sink the carrier, but to use this new economic lethality to bypass it entirely. A coordinated swarm of low-cost drones targeting oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz creates an immediate global liquidity crisis. The kinetic cost to Iran is negligible. The economic cost to the petrodollar system is existential. This is not warfare. It is balance sheet destruction on a global scale. The geographic center of this conflict is not the Middle East. The true battlefield is a distributed network of politically unstable, financially integrated nations. These are the gray zones. The operational blueprint views regional instability, like the travel warnings issued for South Africa, not as isolated crises, but as proxy laboratories. They are pre-selected environments for staging the assets required for an asymmetric economic counterattack. The deployment of jet fighters, air defenses, and carrier groups to the Gulf is a matter of public record. Experts confirm this sharpens the risk of kinetic conflict. But this is a calculated misdirection. According to CSIS analysis, the true objective of a cornered state actor is not symmetric attrition, but systemic disruption. The staging of conventional forces is the trigger, not the threat. It provides the political cover to activate pre-positioned assets in these gray zone territories. These zones serve a dual purpose. First, as logistical hubs for sanctions, evasion and liquidity transfer, weakening the target system from within. Second, as launch pads for cyber-financial warfare. Unable to sink a carrier, the logical response is to target its financial underpinning, the solvency of the petrodollar. A conventional strike on Iran would initiate a launch-on-warning protocol, not with missiles, but with algorithms designed to trigger a cascade failure in Western financial markets, originating from these proxy labs. The consequences of a strike, as reports like Critical Iran Strike Consequences suggest, are not confined to 2026 regional borders. The primary vector of attack is economic, with the goal being a systemic dollar collapse. The military theater is bait. The real war will be fought by proxies from financially integrated but politically unstable states, transforming a regional kinetic event into a global solvency crisis. The math is not emotional. It is a zero-sum calculation. The launch-on-warning doctrine is not strategy. It is a systemic protocol failure waiting for a trigger. CSIS analysis confirms it was designed for a symmetrical, industrial-age conflict. Enemy missiles are detected. We launch ours before impact. It assumes the data is clean. It assumes the enemy is rational. Both assumptions are now liabilities. Now introduce the fog of digital war. An adversary, unable to compete with U.S. kinetic assets deployed to the Middle East, does not target a carrier. They target the data stream feeding the carrier's command center. A sophisticated cyber attack blinds the radar. The screen goes from clear to no signal. The commander now faces a zero-sum decision matrix. Is this a system malfunction? Or is it the 5-minute prelude to a hypersonic missile strike designed to decapitate the fleet? The doctrine of launch-on-warning forces his hand. In a vacuum of information, protocol dictates he assume the worst-case scenario. Hesitation is not an option, it's a court-martial. The fear of being a sitting duck forces a launch. This is the asymmetric vector. A low-cost cyber weapon forces a multi-billion-dollar kinetic response, not against a confirmed enemy, but against a ghost in the machine. As RUSI reports articulate, this isn't warfare, it's forced error. The military buildup becomes the bait, and the antiquated protocol becomes the trigger for a conflict that will not be measured in kinetic cost, but in the solvency crisis that follows. The kinetic trigger, the carrier group deployment, is a strategic miscalculation. According to RUSI risk models, an adversary backed into a corner has zero incentive to engage symmetrically. Their logical response vector is asymmetric, targeting the true center of gravity: financial solvency. CSIS assessments confirm the primary U.S. vulnerability is not the carrier, but the brittle architecture of its commerce and data infrastructure. The objective is not to sink a ship, it is to demonstrate the capacity to trigger a liquidity crisis. The calibration shot will occur within the next 12 months. It will not be a missile launch. It will be a sudden, cascading grid failure at a major West Coast container port, timed with a simultaneous, unexplained outage at its corresponding Tier 1 internet exchange point. Official attribution will cite cascading infrastructure failure. No digital fingerprints, no definitive proof. The economic cost will be measured in the tens of billions. The strategic message, however, is a mathematical certainty. The protocol for a full-scale attack on the dollar's solvency has been validated.